Now, before we begin, I want to ask all of you, because ethics is a kind of a different thing from what we normally do as ICT professionals. So I want to ask you all, and it's quite different from most of the things we discuss, but it's very much an important issue that we need to all constantly consider as ICT professionals. I want to ask all of you, when you hear the course, when you think about ethics in ICT, what comes to mind? What do you think about?
I think I can try.
Yes, Topisa, then Emmanuel after.
Okay, when we look at ethics in ICT, I would look at it in a way of the principles that guide us in managing our different information systems. Principles or basically principles.
Thank you so much, Topista. Emmanuel?
Doctor, for me, ethics in IT, I look at it from a perspective of how do we, as ICT officers, do work, you should say, do work responsibly or act within the confines of the law without being compromised at any one point in the process of doing our work as IT professionals. I submit.
Thank you, Emmanuel. I think that those two responses give us a head start of what we're going to discuss in IT. Let me quickly share my screen so we can begin to understand this thing we talk about at ICT, ethics in ICT. So I hope my screen is visible.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
It's visible.
Doctor.
Okay. So, of course, the most important thing is for us to understand what ethics is. That's one of the most important things, to understand what ethics is and its place in our field, our professional lives. As both Topista and Emmanuel were saying, what are those principles that guide us as we carry out our duties? This is technology, which can do anything, but there are boundaries that we must keep, because we are not dealing just with technology, we are dealing with people, because people are interacting with this technology. So we want to understand the basic concepts of ethics. So this is what this particular course unit is, and this session, to understand those basic concepts. Then the ethical theories, those principles that Tupista was talking about, what are those principles that guide us? Then how do we apply ethical theories into our code of conduct in ICT management? So to understand science, technology, and ethics, we need to look at all the domains and how they intersect. On one side, you have science. Then you have technology. Now, in the I don't know what age they call it, the historic ages, when as man was developing, Science wasn't there, but technology existed. Yeah, so science is a new construct. So, but as humanity was developing, science wasn't always there, but technology existed. But nowadays, technology cannot develop without science. Normally, science is the one that guides the development of technology. In between there, you have society and individuals who are responsible for science, who are driving science, and they're also driving technology. So these two concepts are emerging from society and individuals, and they are being used by society and individuals. Now, because they are being used by society and individuals, you cannot help but discuss ethics, because they must do this within a certain set of boundaries. Yeah? They must do this within a certain set of boundaries. You do not want the technology or the science to step on the toes of another. So, in detail, what is science? It is described as pure knowledge. It is an organized body of knowledge. Now, they say it is unrelated to value. Okay? But, on the other hand, if they say it's unrelated to value, then they say it cannot be biased. But however, it is people who are dealing with this knowledge, who are developing this knowledge. They're the ones making decisions on where the knowledge, how the knowledge is being developed. So you cannot say it doesn't have value, because a person has something that they value. A human being has something that they value. So to say that it is unrelated to value is to be biased. People are the ones who develop this knowledge. So take an example. Technologies, social media technologies have been developed by human beings. The science and technology behind this is started by certain human beings. So you've had cases of where Facebook and the like have been sued for collection of private data and selling it, using it for profit. So the technology they created intentionally collects information, and then the individual intentionally sells it without the consent of the owner of that information. So that is it. That is where it shows where we need to be careful about how we view science and technology. Technology then comes in. So it is a branch of science. The difference between science and technology, it's the creation of artifacts or techniques. And the purpose of its existence is to solve problems. To solve existing problems or needs or wants. Now we come to what is ethics. So here it's broken down into three parts. The first part is what makes my actions as an individual morally right or wrong? What makes my actions, me as Sheba? Then we can even switch it to what makes a certain organization X, what makes their action morally right or wrong? What makes the actions of Uganda Matters University morally right or wrong? You can also place the organization in which you work, where you are currently employed. What makes the actions of the entire organization morally right or wrong? By the time you see and a whole organization like Facebook is being sued, the question of morality comes in. Yeah. The next question is, so the first question is dealing with conduct. The next question is, what makes a person or something good or bad? Here we're talking about value. Here we're talking about value. What is my value as an individual? People talk about, you hear people who are discussing moral and ethical issues talking about the value of life. We talk about the value of life. What is my value as a human being? My right to education, my right to shelter, my right to life itself. What is my right to life itself? If anyone has ever heard of the arguments and the discourse that goes on on the subject area of abortion or euthanasia, I was listening to a program yesterday. I think it was yesterday or the day before, I can't remember, where they were talking about how the number of people in Canada who are currently being euthanized, you can call it, but it's basically ending someone's life. Not that the person dies of natural causes or a person dies because of a disease, but the person is their life is purposefully ended. So the question is, the question then that lies is, what is the value of life? Do I have the right to end anyone's life or to end my own life because I am not comfortable with my current state of life? Those are the questions. So what makes a person or something good or bad? What makes a person or something good or bad? So it could be a person, it could be an organization. What makes you good or bad? Then how do we draw the correct conclusion about what we ought to do or what kind of person we ought to be? So ethics is looking at what I ought to do or what kind of person I should be. Those two things. Now, the one thing I don't want us to mistake is to think that when we talk about ethics, we're talking about holiness. No. Holiness is achieved by God. It's a separate thing. But we're talking about ethics. Ethics is, even in our own homes, if some of you are fathers and some of you are mothers, in your homes you have codes of conduct where you say, as long as you are a member of this family, this is how you should behave. You find in a family where they say, everyone has a turn to wash dishes. Those are codes of conduct. Everyone has a turn to clean the house. Those are actual codes of conduct. Yeah, you're actually setting down ethical codes of conduct of how one ought to behave, how one ought to speak to the other. That's what we're talking about when we refer to ethics. So the first two questions are theoretical conceptual questions, and the third is the practical question of how do we apply this? How do we apply moral reasoning in our context as a professional and as an organization? So we're looking at the individual and the organization. Do you have any questions so far?
Not from me, madam.
Okay.
Not from me too.
Okay, let's move on. Characteristics of ethical issues. So moral disagreements are common. Moral issues are often controversial and open-ended. It is often difficult to arrive at a consensus. So here I would like to preempt a question. We are IT professionals. And as IT professionals, we develop artifacts. Some artifacts are meant to solve a practical problem. Like we saw that the definition of an artifact right now, of technology. They are artifacts which are developed to solve problems. Now I want to ask you a question. Why was social media, for example, like TikTok, created? Or Snapchat? Or Instagram? What problem was it solving? Or why was a technology like an iPhone created? Or a smartphone? Let's categorize all of them smartphones. Why were they created?
I can try to answer that.
Please do, please.
So all these technologies were created to improve interactions between people, per se.
Yes. And for
Yeah, I'll
sure,
look at it.
yes, for sure, interaction, the phone in general was created to improve communication. I remember a story that I was told about an uncle of mine. I don't remember him. I was born when he died, but I don't remember him. I must have been very young. Or I may not have been born because his eldest son, my cousin brother, is 1 year older than me. So, and he was a baby when the father died. So I may not have been born. So I don't know him. But I heard the story that when he died abruptly. He died in a flood. So but I heard the story that when in that time, there were no mobile phones. I think there were only landlines, and I don't think my grandfather owned anything like a landline. So how the family got to know, I understand one of his sisters, my auntie, she's also late now. She was breastfeeding her youngest. She was listening to the news, and this was Radio Uganda at that time only. So she was listening to the news, and then she had the announcement how her brother had died. And my cousin sister would say that she was breastfeeding her baby, and she just let the baby fall. She was in shock. So you can imagine you can imagine how you get to know your loved one has passed. Nowadays, it's very easy for someone to pick a phone call and let you know. You don't have to hear it over the radio. Then there's another story they told me. My father also did not bury his mother. She died and they buried her, but they had no way of communicating to him. So you can imagine how communication has improved. Yes, David, you have a comment or question?
And well, what I have is thank you for introducing this question because it's quite an interesting issue because it also looks into the challenges that come with social media. And I think introducing ethical issues, we are basically bringing about things like cyber harassment, cyberbullying, data misuse, and privacy concern and misinformation. Because through social media, people end up saying that maybe this person has passed on, yet that information is not right. So I think also with social media, there are ethical issues that have come up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
David. So you already see when we think about it, we begin to see ethical dilemmas coming out. So now these technologies now they have improved in communication. That is for sure. There's also another question. When these technologies are developed, they are not just improving in communication, they are also in doing something else. Do you remember the article we read when we were doing research methods on multitasking? I don't remember, I don't know if you remember that particular article. And in it, one of the primary things the researchers were trying to find out was how much pleasure one attains when using this technology. So these technologies, the smartphones, the social media, TikToks, and so on and so forth, they are not just designed to improve communication, but they are also designed to increase pleasure, the hedonic experience. And the minute someone is trying to bring about the hedonic experience, one experiences a hedonic experience when they are drinking alcohol or taking drugs. So they are also designed to increase pleasure in us. And once anything is designed to increase pleasure in us, it's also creating an addictive habit in you. Yeah? It's also creating an addictive. So it is designed specifically to increase the feeling of pleasure in the user. So is that, would you say, of course, for the one designing it, the owner, the objective is to keep you hooked so that you keep spending money on this thing that is addictive. So then that also creates an ethical dilemma. That also creates an ethical dilemma. Specifically, I asked things like iPhones, and I remember I read an article on the BBC where they said the iPhone designers created their design to get the user to have the same feeling as one gets when they are in an evangelical church or session, prayer session. That same feeling that an individual feels when they are in that moment of feeling the Holy Spirit. That's the same feeling that the iPhone user also goes through. So you see, it is created with an objective of fostering addiction. So those are already ethical issues that are emerging. Although this person has done it with the objective of making money, but they're also doing it at the detriment of somebody's mental state of mind. Yeah? Those are things that need to be. So the question is, you'll also see some people arguing, but the whole purpose of this business going into anything coming into business is to make money. That's the primary objective. Those who have done ICT strategy, that's the primary purpose of any business. We're here to make money. But are we here to make money at the expense of somebody else? Of demeaning the value in another person? That's the question. So the arguments on both sides, and that's the thing about ethics. That's the primary characteristic about ethics. There are arguments on both sides. I remember when I was doing my undergraduate degree. So I remember the lecturer she's called Professor Carabine. She asked us a question, but why is homosexuality wrong? And I remember our arguments. I remember she really shut down all our arguments. Were saying things like, "Oh, that's not a true expression of love." Then she says, "What makes you think they don't love?" And she said, we talked about sex, and they also enjoy their sex the way it is. So we were perplexed. I remember personally, there was a struggle within me saying, but does that mean homosexuality is right? Because I couldn't figure out the argument. I couldn't figure out the argument of why it's wrong. But of course, later on, as I grew and I became strong in my faith, my own Catholic faith, I understood why, from the Catholic point of view, why it is wrong. But the argument to think that there can't be love between a man and a man, That is false. There can be love between a man and a man. But of course, the question is then, why is it wrong? What is your code of conduct? What is it that drives, that guides you on why this thing is wrong? That's the thing about ethics. There are arguments on both sides, and as an individual, it's you who makes a decision on what stand you're going to take. Then the question, also the other thing, characteristic, is how serious could people disagree with one another? So again, we see disagreement, especially in the Western world. You see that disagreement between those who call themselves pro-life and those who call themselves pro-choice. The argument of abortion and euthanasia. Those arguments, it's a serious divide. You see, it even determines who is the next president in the US, in the United States of America, who is pro-life, who is pro-choice. So that is, those are some of the characteristics of ethics. Moral theories. So moral theories are going to be a core discussion point for us in this session, in this module. The moral theories. So what are they? So they consist of moral principles. I remember Topista said principles that will help us. So these moral theories consist of principles. So they differ. There are several of them, 3 primary ones, and they differ here and there. And there's none that surpasses the other. Each can be applied in its different contexts. So these principles provide conditions under which an action can be morally right or wrong. Note the word, they specify conditions. So there are certain conditions that must exist for something to be right or wrong. So you may find in other conditions that particular act would be wrong, but in another condition, it would be considered right. So I'll give you an example. Medically, when we talk about abortion, we're saying to deliberately remove a child, the baby in the womb before the time, the fetus, whatever you wish to. People give it different labels, but depending on you, on what you hold as your principal code, people have different arguments. So some will take that as morally wrong. But what happens when you have, I don't know if I pronounce this word correctly, they call it ectopic pregnancy. What happens when you have an ectopic pregnancy? The child is being removed from, of course, the child is within the fallopian tube. The child is being removed. And that removal automatically means that baby's life comes to an end. So that is they technically do not define it as an abortion, but it is actually ending the life of this child. So you see the conditions differ. The conditions there are different. So these moral theories are supposed to guide the moral reasoning. You've seen the difference now with abortion and the ectopic pregnancy. The conditions were different. So, together with facts about different moral situations, the moral rules that guide the morality of specific conditions could be derived. And these conditions change on an individual case-by-case basis. So that brings about one thing we're going to discuss later. Ethics is not a top-down situation, it's a bottom-up situation. So the structure of a moral action is that you have an individual, a person, and this individual carries out an act or an action, which action comes with consequences. So you have a person and you say, what makes this person morally good What makes this person be courageous, be kind, and so on and so forth? Being courageous means you may have to stand up against something which everyone else sees as right, or a certain group of people sees as right, that you stand up and speak out on something X. You've all heard, I forget the names of these people. There were certain individuals in the US who actually ended up running out, first escaping from the US before they came out to whistleblow about the government's collection of data on its citizens. I forget the names of some of them, but I think you've heard of them. So that for some was considered as an act of courage, and for others it was seen as an act of treason. What is your motive for doing this thing? What is the character of that person? What is the intention behind a person carrying out that act? The action itself, what makes the action morally right? Is it the motive? Is it the character, the intention of the actor? Should it be solely considered good because it is the person who has done it? What constitutes a good or bad consequence? You can imagine sometimes you have certain things looking good simply because of the person who is standing by them. They appear to be good, but the question is this thing really good? I remember a situation.
Hello,
I could
doctor.
say, yes, please. Yes, David. Hello, David, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me? I think my network may
Did you
be...
technically take off the internet?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we
Yes.
do now.
Yes,
Okay.
doctor, now.
Sorry about that. My network is sometimes when the rainy season begins, the network tends to be a bit weak. So, had this section, had it been clear of the issue of a person and the actions they carry out? Did you hear that part?
No, we didn't.
Okay.
I think we
Okay, so we have individuals who carry out actions. Yeah. And this individual may carry out an action. Let me give you an example. Look at the actions of Nelson Mandela. Yeah. Nelson Mandela led the fight against apartheid in South Africa for a very long time. And we all know he was imprisoned for, I think it was 20 something years. He was imprisoned. And when he came out, we all saw his acts of forgiveness and reconciliation. And when he became president, his actions were essentially led to, were meant, and I think he did a good job of trying to reconcile a nation that was greatly divided along racial lines. Now, one of the things we also need to understand, of course, is as much as there was apartheid, we cannot say that all actions of the Black South Africans were good and all actions of the white South Africans were bad. No. They were equally, of course, the big thing that came out was that there was apartheid, there was racial discrimination. That one was clear. And many actions were done, good and bad. So, looking at a person like Nelson Mandela, I think universally you cannot say his actions were morally good. Okay? His actions were morally good as a political leader. We can all point that one out. So his actions, we see his desire as a person that his fellow Black South African citizen is treated as equally as the white South African. I think that was his motivation. Then we saw his actions. Then we saw the consequences of his actions. However, I remember there was a story before the peaceful actions he made. Nelson Mandela also did carry out some acts of violence. I remember they bombed quite a few things. And I remember the Queen of England labeled him as a terrorist. So I remember I was listening to a documentary where they were saying it was that then became an awkward moment when she had to host Nelson Mandela as the president of South Africa, a man she had labeled as a terrorist. But however, those actions, he did carry them out. That was a fact. And she also labeled him accordingly, according to those actions. So what constitutes a good or bad consequence? Yeah, this is what this slide is referring to. So this is what a structure of a moral action is. So again, the example that I think I've given you points out to what I was stating earlier, that when we talk about ethics, we're not talking about sainthood or something connected to religion. We're talking about actions that every individual carries out. Yeah? Actions that every individual carries out. Imagine today, let's say I sat down with Topista and I told her, have you heard what Andrew did? Andrew did ABCD. That is basically Lugambo, gossip. That's what I'm doing. Now, and anyone there would say, that was bad. That's a bad thing. But then imagine if I asked one of you to pay me some money for teaching you right now, that you have taken up so much of my time. Or imagine I'm supervising one of you and I ask you for money. And one of you decides to go and report to the authorities that, you know what, Dr. Sheba asks us for money. That cannot be considered Lugambo. That is an ethical action, whistleblowing, because what I'm doing is unethical. So you see the two actions under different circumstances can be how they would be measured. Yeah. So we have three major kinds of moral theories. The first one is consequence-based, or sometimes referred to as utilitarian. We are going to discuss each of them in detail. Then you have deontological theories, which are looking at the law. Then we have virtue-based theories, which look at the individual. So all these are theories they are the three major theories that are normally looked at. Now, the most important thing is to understand that there's no such thing as applied ethics. It's misleading. Or practical ethics. Ethics does not have a top-down approach. It's normally a bottom-up approach. Yeah? It's normally a bottom-up approach. So, again, you look at things like euthanasia and abortion. They are very, very controversial issues. Very, very controversial issues. There's a story I heard about it, that it happened in the Second World War. There was a woman, I think she was a German Jew, who had a child. She was with her child, and she had the German soldiers. What did they call them? Forget what they called them. The soldiers of Hitler. I forget their name. But these soldiers were at her door, ready to come in and kill both her and her child. And she decided to kill her child before these people came. Said at least her killing him would be more merciful than what they were going to do. So that is an example of euthanasia. At that stage, is what she did morally right? That is a question. The other question would be, okay, what was her state of mind as she carried out this act? What was her state of mind? Let's look at abortion. Abortion, even those who look at it from a religious point of view, is in reality the ending of one's life. Then that is the reality. That is the reality of, if one looks at even the scientific side, like when does life begin and so on and so forth. But then there's also the question of that person who carried out the abortion, what was their state of mind when they did that? What was their state of mind? Or what happens when somebody ends their own life? On both a human level, it is a terrible thing to see. Eh? When you hear about someone has ended life, it's a shocking thing. But then also the other question is, what was their state of mind? So everything to do with ethics, it's not a judgmental point. It's not a point where you sit in judgment of what others are doing. I remember when I got my first job, and my boss saw my degree. My first degree was in ethics and development studies, and he said, my concern is, are you going to be looking over my shoulder on what I'm doing? I remember that was his question. Are you going to be looking over my shoulder? And someone thinks that automatically it has to do with looking at who is doing right and who is doing wrong. Eh? But that's not what ethics is. It is a guide. It is something that guides us to do the best that we can with what is currently available. Sorry, here it's a bit stuck. Sorry, my computer is a bit stuck. Give me a minute. I don't know why it's not moving. So it started moving.
Outside.
Sorry. Today everything is.
Sorry?
Sorry, my computer was acting up. Eh? Let me get back to where I was. I hope I hadn't gone off again.
Oh, no, you are.
No, you were on.
Okay. Now, we do have those anti-theory approaches. A moral theory will be accepted if it can make sense, or if it is compatible with our beliefs and ideas. But there are those who may not have the same beliefs as what we want, as what we are trying to do. There is no theory that can meet every criteria that we are looking for. That's why we look at case-by-case basis. So the moral precepts are only rules of thumbs that people can go to guide them. In other cases, if we have developed a kind of law or code of conduct, that may help us. Now, we also have challenges to morality. One of them is egoism. Most of the time, I'm motivated to do with what I want, what gives me myself, or what are my interests. If my interests are fulfilled, if this code of conduct is going to go against my personal interests, I'll not pick it up. Yeah, I only want my interests to come first. And in reality, that is life. In reality, that is life. Most of us focus on what we want to do. I remember one time we were talking about, in my household, I was talking to the people I live with. We were talking about things that were happening during the campaigns. When you hear they're now beaten up Bobby wine and so on and so forth. And everyone was feeling bad that why would people do this? Then at a certain point I said, but you know what? It will hurt now, but tomorrow people won't remember. I said, why? I said, this same thing happened to Besigye. But people forgot about it. At the end of the day, someone is only interested, I'm at my home, I'm in my home, I've eaten my food, my children are okay. The ethical issues, I will forget about them. So egoism comes in. 2, relativism. So this is something, relativism is something that even religious leaders talk about, where people say, for you this is bad, for me it is good. So me, I don't take it as being bad. We come from different cultures, we follow different norms. So everyone has their different ways of doing things. So relativism can challenge morality. Relativism can change morality. Moral skepticism. Where people just don't want to believe there is something as good or bad. Where someone just doesn't want to believe. It's the same thing as religion, where someone wants to, but is God really, 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 really there? When someone has chosen to doubt, they've made a decision to doubt, and there's nothing you can do about it. Then there's moral nihilism, where it's not taken as reality. Ethical claims are either fictitious or maybe true or false. They are neither true or false. Now, so far, do we have any question before we come to social responsibility?
Look, for me, I have one question.
Yes, please, Emmanuel.
Just the previous slide. No, the other one where we were discussing the norms. Okay, where you talked about different people have different feelings.
Yes.
Like egoism and relativism. For me, it is okay. For you, it is not okay. Okay? Now, at what point do we say this is ethical? Do we continue like if it is okay with me, then I will continue to do it? Or there is a time where we have to have a balance and say, beyond this, it becomes unethical, regardless of how you feel about it or what you see.
Yes. Manuel, that's a good question. So this is where when we began, we talked about what makes a thing good or a person good. So there's the individual, then there's the thing or the organization. So when we come to organizations, this is where we have codes of conduct. Codes of conduct, where it is set down as a law, as a policy, as a law. Let me give you a very practical example in ICT, something that kind of spells out a code of conduct, the ICT policy. So the ICT policy basically spells out, this is what you're supposed to do with data. This is how we handle the data that we have collected from our clients. And outside of this, it becomes illegal. That's one way. That's one way where, as an organization, where you override relativism. But, however, there are individual situations where you can't overstep, where someone can decide to overstep. Take an example. ICT has the power to read your emails, and they can do so without somebody even knowing it. ICT has the power at the back end to do anything. which may not be necessarily spelled out. That comes at the individual level. So at the individual level, one might say, me as Emmanuel, I'm making a decision. This is my code of conduct. I will not do this. I remember there's a gentleman I met who clearly stated for him he doesn't lie. I'm against lying, telling a lie. And on a general sense, that's a very, very good principle. Now, here's my question to you. Some of you are married, not so. The gentlemen in this class. Say your wife cooks a meal and it is not so good. Would you state it? Would you tell your wife this meal hasn't been good?
Doctor, now it depends on how you put it.
You would find better ways of telling her.
Better ways. That maybe the salt you can reduce a bit here. Something like that. Or imagine she puts on a new dress and she's expecting you to say something nice. And in reality, you don't think it is. So those are questions like, would you lie at that point? What would you do? And so those are just small considerations. So Emmanuel, I think for me, that's what I would say. Relativism can be handled in different ways. At organizational level, there are codes of conduct that can be put up. And that can be a generic form of ensuring that we all make an ethical decision as we carry out our duties. But then at the end of the day, you will not stop someone from embezzling the organization. An individual will do it. On passing on information that they shouldn't pass on. Yeah? So that happens. Emmanuel, I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yes, doctor, you have. Thank you.
Social responsibilities. So this concept of social responsibility, it's basically asking organizations or corporations to look beyond profit making in the society in which they are obviously benefiting, to look beyond just making money. There are those, however, who argue against social responsibility. So you have Friedman's traditional view of business, which says the purpose of any business being anything, any entity being in business is to maximize profit. That is the objective of any organization. So there are those who have that mindset. There are those who have that mindset. If you go to societies like China, you will find this mindset where they will even use a worker who will be paid a bowl of rice as their wage, but the objective is to make money. Whether I use you, a worker, to the point of nothingness, whether I pollute the environment to absolutely nothing, it doesn't matter. Me, I'm here to make money. Yes, Andrew, you have a question or comment?
Yes, thank you, Doctor. Mine is not a question. Sorry, I lost connection a minute ago, so I missed. So I wanted you to go back to the previous slide.
Okay. Is it this one?
No, then the previous one, before you went to this topic.
There's nihilism.
There was something. Okay, no. Go back. Forward.
Here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. I wanted you to just throw more light on what you mean by a non-question begging answer.
Now,
That's okay.
here, when we talk about moral skepticism, let us consider a person who is asking you to prove that God exists. To prove that God exists. If this person, let me give another example. There's a saint in the Catholic Church called Saint Bernadette. She had visions of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And there were so many miracles that happened, very visible miracles that happened during those apparitions, where people got healed, had instantaneous healings, and so on and so forth. So Bernadette was asked a question about those who had failed to believe. And then she made a statement. She said, "For those with faith, no evidence is required. For those without the faith, there's no evidence that it will ever be enough." That's where you can put moral skepticism too. There are those who have chosen to remain on the fence. There are those who have chosen to remain on the fence where they have failed to believe there's any such thing as a good act or a bad act. Someone simply chooses to say, I personally refuse to accept there's any such thing as a good act or a bad act. Now, of course, essentially, this person is being driven by egoism, my self-interest. Yeah? This individual is being driven by egoism. By the time somebody refuses to accept an act as being morally bad or morally good, they are being driven by self-interest. We all know when something is bad, but we choose to do it anyway. And here I'm not talking about, again, holiness. I'm talking about moral goodness. Or take an example. To pay wages of your worker, it's a moral good. Somebody has carried out and has given you a service. It is only right that you pay them. It's only right that you pay them. To misuse somebody's information, to get somebody's information and sell it, personal information, we all know that is bad. You all had the example, there was that moral outcry. I think it already has happened. I don't think it even matters anyway to discuss it. I think Kenya and Uganda and other countries sold their healthcare data to the US for certain amounts of USDs. Certain amounts of USDs. Now, of course, in terms of healthcare, they are selling aggregated data. So they're not saying Shebanya Kaisiki was tested HIV positive on such and such a day. They're probably just selling aggregated data. But then the moral question also comes this way. What does the US want with our healthcare data? Do you want to decide on whether you should just send more condoms to Uganda or just send more HIV so that we're all wiped out? Why do you want that data? What is the objective behind you wanting our health data? What do you intend to do with it? Those ethical questions. But however, the African governments have already done so. They have already signed and most likely sold this data. So if you went to ask those government officials who did that, what would be their moral standing for doing that? In other words, that person will never justify their moral beliefs or ideas. Even if you argued it to the beginnings of the heavens to the end, this person has chosen to be skeptical. They are not denying that there is morality doesn't exist. They do know it exists, but they are skeptical about a particular case, or they have chosen to be skeptical. I don't know if I answer your question.
Yes, you have. Okay. Very well. Thank you.
So back to the issue of social responsibility. So the issue of social responsibility, it is one of the ways ethics is applied. It's one of the ways an organization intentionally applies ethics, where you say, I'm not just going to look at making money, but like I said, there are those who simply look at profit maximization. And this is evident in countries like China and countries like India, where they only focus on making money. Yeah. Those are nations where you can find that kind of mindset. Then we have Carol's 4 responsibilities for a business. The first, this is where social responsibility comes in. Now, Carol points out certain things that any organization is responsible for. The first and most fundamental, of course, is economic responsibility. The purpose of any entity getting into business is to make money. Yeah. If I get my hard-earned money and decide to start a business, be it small, big, whatever it is, my intention is to make money, to make profit, increase my wealth. That is my objective. So that is the first and most important responsibility. And one carries out certain principles in order to make that money. So take an example, they are responsible for carrying out research to find out what are the best ways to cut costs in this, who is the least possible supplier, which individual can I hire that will give me quality of service, and so on and so forth. Yeah. What's the best way to market my product or service? That is all geared towards economic responsibility. Then the second is legal responsibility. We look at what the current government in which I'm working in, what are the laws that manage my sector? Statutory laws like paying pay as you earn, paying NSSF, and so on and so forth. What are those laws that exist? Then there are other laws which specifically tie us, ICT. What are the laws on data protection? What are the laws on data protection? If we are going to have information systems, what does my government say about how I handle data, private data that I collect from my clients and employees? Then at the 4th and 5th level, you have the ethical responsibilities. What should this organization stand for? What are our upheld beliefs that are in connection with the society in which we come from? So this is where we develop ethical codes of conduct as an organization. Yeah, as an organization. And you also have situations, there are certain people who will say, I will choose to work for this organization because its ethos, its ethical profile matches with my personal ethical profile. Okay? Take an example. There are organizations which only employ, I remember there's this organization, forget the name, World Vision. World Vision primarily mostly employs individuals who are from the Pentecostal movement. Why are they doing that? Because they want to move with people with the same beliefs and codes of conduct. The same beliefs and codes of conduct. That's why they are doing that. And then you also find somebody who is from an evangelical background would wish to work with that company because they carry the same beliefs. So at the 4th level is discretionary responsibility. This is purely voluntary obligations a corporation assumes. So take an example where a corporation says, like MTN says, we're going to sponsor sports. That is voluntarily, we are going to sponsor sports. Or someone says we're going to sponsor the babies' homes where you find orphans, or we're going to donate to an organization that handles orphans, school fees for orphans, and so on and so forth. So this is Carol's responsibilities of businesses. At the bottom, you have the economic and legal. These are a must. Then at the top level, you have the social responsibility. Yeah, the social responsibility, ethical and discretionary. Now, why is this social responsibility important? One, it creates social capital. The goodwill of the stakeholders can be used as a competitive advantage. When you see MTN coming in to support sports and things like that, MTN may automatically be endeared to you. Say, they are working with us. It opens doors in the local community. Then it enhances the reputation with consumers. So what are some of the other benefits? The company may be able to charge premium prices and gain brand loyalty. It helps enduring relationship with suppliers. Then can attract outstanding employees. Remember what I said earlier? There are some people who say, I choose to work with this organization because its ethos, its working ethics align with mine. Then it also can help you garner the goodwill of public officials, government itself. Reasons for unethical behavior. One may be unaware that certain behavior is questionable. We all come from different backgrounds, and I may come from my home and I think maybe speaking out of turn is okay. And another person says, no, for me, I don't consider that okay. Our different cultures and norms also affect. The culture, if I speak from the Western side, the culture of Mtoro is very different from the culture of Mchiga. Very, very different. Yeah. I don't know if we have Bachiga in this class, but I had a legal case I had to handle, and I got a lawyer, a Mchiga man. And at a certain point, we were discussing something. And I was telling him that, this person who's going to mediate for us, she wanted to pull out. And then he goes ahead and gives me a proverb in his culture. And then at first in his language, then he translated it to English. And I was like, there's no way Amtoro would say this out loud. But this Muchiga man simply put it there without blushing, nothing. Whereas Mtoro would go behind and say something as gently, as politely as possible. So cultures and norms. I remember there was also a story, I don't know, I might have shared it with this class, where someone told us a story of an American company went to Japan to market yogurt. So they had to first sample the market. So they got a number of Japanese citizens and gave them the yogurt. They tasted it, and they asked them, "Do you like it?" And these participants nodded their heads politely. Then they brought the second batch, the same thing, and then they put it out in the market, and the yogurt completely failed. So later on, they found out that in the Japanese culture, it's considered extremely rude to say, "I don't like this thing." So unless you know the culture, you may not know they're actually saying, "No, I don't like this thing." So there you see cultural norms, how they differ. Unless you're really, really part of a culture, you won't know. So these are some of the things that may affect. Then also different values between business people and stakeholders. Yeah. And this is actually a key point. You may assume that we all carry the same values, but we don't. I've seen this even at personal level and at business level. Everyone has their different values. Everyone has their objective. The objectives do not align. The objectives do not align. So that can cause unethical behavior. So later on, we're going to discuss this in detail, but there are certain levels of moral development. We're going to discuss this in detail. We have the pre-conventional, the conventional, and principal level, but we're going to discuss them in detail slightly ahead. Then we also have codes of conduct. So remember earlier, Emmanuel had asked the question, how do we all act together when considering everyone has their different challenges that may affect how they adopt ethical behaviors. So codes of conduct, codes of ethics can be implemented within an organization to ensure that a uniform image is given before the public. So a code of conduct clarifies the expectations of an employee, how you expect them to behave. So normally you find when a new employee comes in, HR hands you the code of conduct, how you expect it to behave as you use ICT, how you expect it to dress when you come into work, and so on and so forth. And normally employees are expected to sign and to say they agree to this code of conduct. So it also makes clear to everyone how you expect it to behave. Whistleblowers. Now, this one is a very delicate matter. It's a very delicate matter on whistleblowers. We have seen whistleblowers at national level, even at organizational level. Sometimes it can be dangerous, or it can even alienate you from the society which you one time belonged, from the community in which you one time belonged. But however, whistleblowers also indicate certain illegal habits that may be going on within an organization or a certain community. They are also extremely important. So here are just some guidelines for ethical behavior. We've talked about ethics or ethical codes of conduct, certain standards. Those guide. 2, morality, one's rule of personal behavior. So your ethics will guide at the organizational level, but then also at the personal level, you as an individual, you make a decision on how you want to portray yourself as an individual. I gave you an example of that gentleman who I one time met and said for him telling lies, being truthful is extremely important. So you as an individual must have your own ethical code of conduct. Let me just give you an example. Each one of you made a decision to come and do a master's degree. That speaks to your moral code of conduct. Just by making that decision to say, I want to upgrade myself. And then you make a decision to come to class regularly and to participate. That already speaks to your ethical code of conduct. There are those who completely refuse to go to school. They are there. There are those who they pay for your school fees and you simply don't get the degree. That already speaks to your moral standards. Then 3 is the law. There is a law that forbids us to do something, that creates boundaries. So take an example of us, ICT. The government has put up a law on data, on how data must be treated. Private data, public data, protected data. That law is there. So those are certain guidelines that guide us, that guide our moral standing. Do we have any questions so far before we talk about values?
Not from me, madam.
Okay.
Not from me, doctor.
Okay. So let's talk about values, because when we talk about ethics, they go hand in hand with values. What do we value? What do we consider as good in order to make certain decisions? Yeah. So here we have a definition of value. So there are quite a number of them. So here, Rocket defines values as a small number of core ideas or cognitions present in every society about desirable end states. Small number of core ideas or cognitions present in every society. So if you consider values, as Sheba, I have my values, things which I stand by as Sheba. Then I work for Uganda Matters University, which also has its values. Here as Sheba, I run a small farm, and I also have my values as I run my farm. So those things that help me make my decisions, that I believe if I make this decision, this will be the desirable end result. So when we look at Fisher and Dovell, here they talk about values are the core ideas about how people should live and the ends they should seek. They also say they are shared by the majority of the people within a community or society. They say they are normally expressed in general concepts, often no more than single words like peace of mind. So because they are expressed in general terms, they do not give guidance on how particular things should be evaluated. So these values, the core thing is that they are shared by members of a certain culture or society, and they are deemed to, they help us guide on what is good or desirable. And they are enduring beliefs. So these are beliefs that are not, they don't change over time. They are things that they last over a period of time. So values are what make us judge as a profession what is right to do. So individual at organizational levels of values determine what is right and what is wrong. Doing what is right or what is wrong is what we mean by ethics. So to behave ethically is to behave in a manner that is consistent with what is right or morally right, or what is moral. So we have different types of values. You have moral values. So moral values are interpersonal behavior, how I behave with my colleagues, how I behave with the customers, how the organization behaves, how it treats the people are treated internally and how they treat those outside. Then we have competence levels. I earlier pointed out, each one of you chose to do a master's degree. Why are you doing that? You want to increase your value in competence, in my ability to do something. That is a competence value. Then you have personal values. Personal values, someone may say, what do I need to do to achieve a peace of mind as an individual? What is desirable for me at the end of the day? Someone may say me, my value is making a lot of money. If it means I step on toes, I end another person's career, it's okay. Another person says, me, my desire is to be at peace. That every act I do is of good to me and for the other. So again, this is at personal level. Then finally, you have social values, those concerned with the ends that one would desire for society, like world peace. Value application. So here, coming from Rocketch and Billing, so you see that problem with values is the application in society due to different situations that may arise. First, you may have different values, let's say, for example, on telling the truth and loyalty. We talked about whistleblowing. You have individuals, like the individual, I forget the gentleman's name, who worked for NASA. He was working for NASA, a part of this organization, then he whistleblows on them. So which was more important, telling the truth or loyalty? Yeah. Consider the spokesperson for the military and police. When they get up to speak, they have a dilemma of telling the truth and being loyal to the organizations in which they operate. So application of values can be quite challenging. There's the organizational part, then there's the personal part. Simple and whole values can only provide general guidance. So we again saw the issue of telling the truth or not telling the whole truth. The spokesperson for the military knows what it means to tell the whole truth. So if I omit some of the truth, does that mean I'm telling a lie? Then now interpretation becomes something else. Interpretation becomes something else, because the minute you start to fragment the value, you begin to lose the value of the actual value of that thing, that principle. Business values. So why do you have certain entities into business in business? So one, a business will come up with a new service or product with the intention of improving human welfare. So we had talked about smartphones. Why were they there? To improve communication. I quickly shared with you the link for today's class, and then I shared with you the link to the module and the enrollment key. That was quickly shared. So we can say the smartphone together with WhatsApp and all these other services, that the purpose was to improve our human welfare. But then again, we can't ignore the fact that this same smartphone, the same WhatsApp, also produces behaviors of addiction. Yeah, we can't deny that fact. So there's that primary value. So the business values, we can therefore define them as strong beliefs that can bring about important sustainable improvement in people's welfare. So here we have characteristics of sustainability. You have the environment, economics, and society. And all three must be considered once a business is going into, and any venture is coming into business. So a business value must embody all the three. Yeah. You must embody commitment to social concerns by managers who are competent, always reinventing themselves and their cooperation in an honest way. How do we acquire values? Yeah. So we have this gentleman, this Lawrence gentleman, who mainly based his research on boys' affluent background. And he developed 3 levels of moral development. So you have the first one, pre-conventional, which has 2 stages. The first stage is, if I don't do something, I'm going to get punished. And we see this in children. Children will conform to rules out of fear of punishment. So the second stage is one of instrument exchange orientation. A child shows concern for some of others, but it is ultimately motivated by the belief of benefits. If I do something, they are going to thank me. You see, even in schools, in kindergarten and so on and so forth, if a child does well, they come home saying, "Oh, mommy, daddy, I got a star today." The benefits that will come out of it, are the rewards that will come out of it. Then we have the conventional stage, which has stages 3 and 4. This one is other-centered individual, other-centered. So the individual does something so that they may be accepted into a certain circle. So we see this mainly in adolescents and young adults, where the adolescents are driven by peer pressure. If I do this, then I'll be accepted. Yeah. So in stage 3, the primary concern is being nice and gaining approval. Then in stage 4 is law and order, where you have rules and laws are valued because they maintain a certain social order worth preserving. If a teenager, you may find teenagers will dress in a certain way because this is now the trend that is going on. I'll use certain words because this is the trend. So not necessarily it's the actual law, but the actual law for a certain community or peer group. Then we have the post-conventional. This is the higher principles of human conduct. So here we have two stages. In stage 5, the person is concerned with social contract issues. If I must belong to a certain community, these are the behaviors that I must attain. So take an example. I moved here in Fort Portal. I say Fort Portal, but I'm actually in Kienjojo, deep in the village. I moved here in 2020. And with time, I had to conform because it was a completely different society, different from Nkosi, where I had lived for 16 years. Yeah. So in Nkosi, it's a more predominantly academic environment. You might think it's religious, but in reality, it's a very, very academic environment. It's very rare to find people talking about religion or faith, talking about Jesus or Our Lady or things like that. No, it's mostly academic. Even with priests and whatever, the motivation is speak academic. Now you come to the village here, you're deep in the village where you're living with community members who have little or no formal education. You're going for mass. If you're going for mass, it's quite different than if you're in Kampala. The language itself, what the priest will teach at the end of the day is quite different from what a priest will preach in an urban environment like Kampala or in an academic environment like Nkosi. So it took some adjustment on my side. Yeah. I had to adjust now to being called by my pet name. If anyone who is in Toro knows, our pet names are so important. Atwoki, Apuli, Arari, that kind of thing. When I was in Kampala with my family, those things were never used. But now, this environment is completely different. That even when I pick a phone call to call someone, I first identify myself as Atwok Sheba. So here, people don't know me as Dr. Sheba or Sheba. They know me as Atwok Sheba. And that's something that had to completely, my moral, even now, even me referring to anyone, I must use the pet name. Automatically, it changes. Yeah. So that is where the social contract issues come in. Then you have stage 6, where a person is concerned with universal ethics versus cultural ethics, where a person's own conscience is now driven by a universal ethical principles. This is quite different from what we were talking about here previously when we talked about social, the social contract issues. But then you have now the personal universal ethical issues that are driving the individual and the decisions that they are making. So here, a person is driven by principles that are based on religion or moral authority that may be viewed as compelling or fair. So here we have the typical examples of like Nelson Mandela, what he did. Those who are Catholics know about Pope John Paul II, the values he stood for. Gandhi, Martin Luther King. So those are typical examples of people who are now driven by their conscience. The universal ethical principles that they hold, that they will say, I must do this, even if it means that I stand individually and alone. So very few individuals reach this level. Very few individuals reach this level because it means a denial of self, that you may even be alienated from society because of your beliefs, that even your personal freedom is cut short. Do we have any questions so far before we talk about Carol Gilligan's feminist core ethical beliefs? Do we have any question?
Not from me.
Okay.
Not
So we
from
look at
me.
Carol's ethical, what she presents. She says that women and men develop different ethical beliefs. She says men's ethical beliefs are very structured. They are more law-like, whereas for women, they are more ethical values are driven by sympathy rather than reason. I don't know how far true it is, why she would believe this, but probably it is. She says that boys generally express justice-based values more than girls. Says this seems to indicate that girls are morally inferior to boys or lag developmentally behind. Men tend to base their moral decisions on duty, principle-oriented moral theories, and so on and so forth. I don't know how far true these beliefs are. Take an example, if you see the number of single mothers versus single fathers, I don't know which would be considered more of duty than the other. So for Galligan, she develops a model where she has two moral orientations. There's the rule-based justice voice. Then there's the contextual-based where the care voice comes in. So justice-based is what is the law, and then the care is the sympathy, where there is need, where we are thinking about compassion and particular needs, feelings, and so on and so forth, where she points out that women are driven by care and men more by justice. So the conclusion is that women's decisions tend to minimize personal pain, avoid separation and isolation, often selfless in accommodating others. So here are some suggested readings. Do we have any questions?
Thank you, Doctor. My just something to inquire about. We talked about the whistleblowers, yeah? And for the examples we have seen, referring to the gentleman we are talking about, I think he's called Edward. I think Edward Snowden, the one of NASA. But I have an instance here in Uganda where someone was working for a company, yeah, and he was fired. Yeah. So when he was fired, he decided to go and whistleblow with NSSF for the company which he was working for, because I think they are not remitting NSSF fully payments. Yeah, I think they are putting just a less percentage. But what happened after that gentleman was called by the company, they gave him some small money, and I think NSSF didn't take it up that much, and it just died like that. So for someone else who sees that, how best can they go about that? Because if such an incident happens, that means there will not be anything which is done about it. Thank you.
Thank you. So your question, Eric, is unless this man if he hadn't talked about it, nothing was going to be done. I think that is the significance of whistleblowing. Is that your question, Eric?
Yes, my question is the significance and how best can it be done so that there is an impact for the whistleblower, because we are looking at whistleblowing, but there is nothing done about it.
Yes.
And we know the consequences of whistleblowing. Most likely, the person who has whistleblowed, he'll end up maybe running somewhere, because most cases there are consequences.
Yes. There are consequences to whistleblowing. There's alienation and, like, for example, though that NASA whistleblower, I don't think he can ever go back to the US, go back to his home and something like that, because that was considered an act of treason. But on the other hand, it was a moral act that he had to bring out to the front. Now, can anything be done about it? I think it goes back to the dilemma of ethics, what we consider as ethical. Somebody, an organization or an individual will argue that for us, this is ethical. We are taking it as ethical. Okay? And then you say, look at a simple thing of war. There are those who heard about the Rwanda genocide war, and then there are those who came in and fought and remove all of that and so on and so forth. They can always argue that war was ethical. But once an individual is killed, how does that does that then justify war? Right now there is a war. The US and Israel have waged a war against Iran. They will argue that they are protecting their citizens from a potential threat. Others will say it is unethical because citizens are being killed and there was no immediate threat. So there are arguments on both sides. So Eric, I think the thing about ethics, one thing we must understand, ethics is not a law, like we say. Number two, it's not about holiness. It's about making the best possible decision. And someone may question your decision at the end of the day. Yeah? Someone may question your decision if it was right or if it was wrong. Those questions will arise, whether you understand it or not. So again, look at there's the general code of conduct. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, now
Yes,
we
we
can.
can.
Okay.
Lost your bit.
So with ethics, there are laws that drive the organization, then there are laws that drive the individual. Where an individual says, this is wrong, I cannot keep quiet about it. And the individual stands up and says, so, this is wrong. Okay? It may probably mean that individual will be castigated. So in reality, sorry, Emmanuel. So in other words, Eric, there is nothing that can ensure that this thing will be taken out unless it is universally accepted. Now this thing is wrong, stop it. Then it will be stopped. But ethics in general, as we understand it, let's not imagine it is coming to solve the world's problems. No. But it's there to guide an organization and an individual on what they ought to do. I don't know, Eric, if I answer your question.
Yes, doctor.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Do we have any other question? Is there any other question or comment before we break off? Yes, Emmanuel.
Thank you, Doctor. I don't know because I heard you talking about it before we break off. So I wanted to bring this at the end of the lecture. I have had a discussion with a few of the members, not all. I don't want to say that what I'm saying represents everyone, but a few of us.
Yes.
And we had a proposal, but this is more dependent on you, on your availability.
Yes.
We've had lectures before that start on Saturday, 11 or midday to whatever it ends, sometimes 3, sometimes 4. Now, the proposal is if you are available and if it's agreeable with all the other members, is it possible to find some days, 2 days during the week, evening hours, to have this lecture during those days and we cut out
The
a Saturday?
I think
Yes.
that for me that is okay, apart from Thursday, because I teach undergraduates. They have an undergraduate class Thursday evening. For me, that would be fine.
Okay, members, what's your suggestion?
Emma, so thank you very much for that. So that
We
that
shall-
leaves only Monday and Wednesday.
No, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday.
Tuesday, the other lecturer mentioned it that he would use that time. If I'm not mistaken.
We didn't agree on it. Mutenyo refused, and the lecturer said it's okay.
All right, so we have Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday.
So we can choose 2 days from those.
Yeah,
Can take Tuesday and Wednesday.
that's okay.
No, I think it's still Monday and
pray-
Wednesday, since it wasn't okay with Hilda in the previous lecture as well.
I pray that it's not a Wednesday, members.
So, Emma, why don't we vote? Why don't we vote on the group on it?
Okay, good enough. We have had the lecturer's mind.
With
Okay.
it?
She has
So we
given
can-
us the other days apart from Thursday.
We can do a poll.
And of course, on our side, we can't do Friday because we have a lecture there.
Correct.
Mm.
So we only have
Shall-
to choose between Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday.
Yes.
Okay, Doctor, we shall do a poll and we shall give you feedback.
Okay, fine.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you, team.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
That's
Doctor.
good.
Thank you, Doctor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, then I think then we shall meet on the day that you have selected.
Yes, Doctor.
Okay.
Doctor, thank you.